A small town within a bustling metro deals with unique challenges brought on by the coronavirus.
It's serious. It's in the neighborhood, it's in the community.
Issues influencing voters and candidates as the election season gains steam.
People are more focused on the economy and on safety, and I think those are the two words when it comes to COVID and political races right now.
And changes to trade across North America with the arrival of the USMCA.
They're leveraging what USMCA has to offer through Arizona.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us. Arizona's COVID-19 caseload surpassed 100,000 this week, making our state one of just a handful to cross that threshold. While numbers continue to climb across the state, the most populous Maricopa County leads in cases. But nestled between Phoenix and Tempe, the town of Guadalupe, one of the state's smallest at less than a square mile, has one of the county's highest positive case rates. Tony Paniagua has more.
The small and historic community of Guadalupe is battling a modern-day invisible menace with enormous implications.
3 community members have passed in the past month from COVID here in the town. There are others that are tied to the community that have passed away, but 3 in the community.
Valerie Molina is in her second term as mayor.
Our council has a lot on their shoulders right now. I think any council in the state has a lot on their shoulders right now. No one's ever been through a pandemic.
The pandemic is surprising many residents, like the Sotelo family. They have lived here for several years.
Tragically, it happened to us. You know, it happened to my son. And it doesn't discriminate and it doesn't judge. You know, if it's everywhere. And it's easy. You know, it's like the virus has no respect for any human life.
After Luis Sotelo's son was exposed to the virus, Luis and his wife Tracy also tested positive and began a self-imposed quarantine. Fortunately, Luis's sister and his mother were negative, so they found a hotel for a week until getting assistance for another place to stay.
Well, I was the last one to come out positive, so while they were in quarantine, I also had to stay in quarantine because I was exposed to it. The thing about it is it didn't hit me right away like it did my son and my wife. To me, it took almost a week to feel a full effect.
They feel lucky that no one had to be hospitalized. Everyone's most recent tests came back negative, so the family is back together again. Guadalupe is a tight-knit community of about 6,000 people of mostly Mexican or Pascua Yaqui Native American roots. It was founded in 1904 and incorporated in 1975. What once felt like a small village in the middle of nowhere is now surrounded by millions of people in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Many residents live below the poverty level. Food banks have become more essential as people try to limit their outings.
And in Guadalupe, we're very condensed. We have multi-generation families in one home. For instance, my home, it's myself and my 2 parents and, my son. So the 3 generations are there, but we're lucky enough to have 4 bedrooms.
So currently, Guadalupe has about 4 times the rate of people testing positive for COVID-19 compared to the rest of the county?
Actually, those numbers were correct on the June 16th weekly numbers. However, as June 23rd last week, we were down to 2.8 compared to the county average. Now that's good, we're going down a bit. Part of it is, though, it's a little bit of a false positive because rates in Maricopa County are increasing as are rates generally across the state.
But the town is taking action to reduce the infection rates, including cooperative efforts with Maricopa County, the city of Tempe, and others to provide education and assistance. That includes handing out thousands of free masks, conducting testing events in the community, and providing assistance to those who are positive.
Hi, may I speak with Rosa or Mary?
Guadalupe has also hired 2 employees known as promotoras in Spanish. They are community liaison assistants, like social workers who provide answers and resources such as shopping for residents under quarantine.
I was home. I was retired. So I came out of retirement to help out my community and see how I can be effective in combating this virus and just stopping the spread. Just like somebody in the community posted, on Facebook about how they felt about the virus. They said, this virus is having a buffet right now. And guess what, people? We're the buffet. It doesn't discriminate.
Prior to COVID, we were moving forward. We were seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. We'd been having some budget woes in Guadalupe, and we actually saw a clearing where we're like, we think we're gonna have a great year this year. COVID hits, everything's at a standstill. Now we're facing a deficit. So we're just trying to get through it and see how we're gonna end at the end of this.
For now, the Sotelo family is celebrating their recovery after such a challenging time.
I feel really good now, like 110%.
But they're not letting their guard down and hope others take COVID seriously.
You know, we're not the ones in charge here. I mean, it's not a joke, you know. Like I said, I'm fortunate, we're fortunate that this is the worst that we got.
As of this week, cases of COVID-19 in Pima County passed 10,000. New efforts to contain the spread include stepped-up contact tracing. We learn more about how the county is adapting its response to the pandemic from Dr. Teresa Cullen, who leads the health department. There's a high number of cases of individuals who are asymptomatic. How exactly are they making their way to get tested and then they're positive?
You know, I just had a discussion actually with one of our labs this morning that's reporting their asymptomatic patients. About 20% of them are positive when they test. The vast majority of those we don't know definitively, but a lot of them are because people know of somebody who's been positive, like they may have worked at a business with them and they elect to go get tested. The testing sites are available on the ADHS website in Tucson, and many of them do not require you to be symptomatic to go get tested.
In Pima County, are you concerned that this region cannot sustain what we're seeing right now?
You know, I am increasingly concerned. I call it a stable crisis, but we are definitely in crisis, and I have no qualms using that word. We need people to be aware that many of the hospitals on a daily basis are shifting patients, and people get good care in that process. I don't want people to worry about that. When a patient is transported, they're transported with the appropriate level of care around them, either by ambulance or by medical transport. But I am concerned. The good news about Pima County is we have close proximity to Maricopa County, and Maricopa County seems to have more ICU beds available than we do right now. It's hard to know what that reflects.
Last week, Vice President Pence said there would be support and resources sent to Arizona. To your knowledge, has that happened yet?
We had 2 DMAT teams come in. They came into Pima County. Yuma also got one. Disaster management teams. They're wonderful. I actually was active duty public health service and had deployed with DMAT in the past. We had an ICU strike team come in. What that means, it's a team specific to support intensive care services. So these teams are working at 2 different hospitals in Pima County right now. We worked closely with the hospitals to identify their need. We also have gotten from the national stockpiles, we've gotten a shipment of ventilators probably 2 weeks ago. We have another one coming in sometime in the next 48 to 72 hours. So we're closely monitoring that. So when the vice president referred to that, I would assume he's referring to those 2 things that did happen.
Given that the resources are slowly starting to trickle in, the number of deaths are dropping ever so slowly. Are you hopeful about the weeks ahead?
I'm not hopeful right now, to be frank. If you ask me, am I hopeful for a month from now? Yes. Right now, the numbers we've seen the last few days do not show a stabilizing factor yet. You know, our early weeks, we had 200 to 250 on average cases a week. Now we have over 2,000. So people just need to be cognizant of the impact that puts on our hospital resources.
What sorts of things are you looking to? I mean, masks now, the majority of people are wearing consistently. Will that tell you something in the next week or so?
Yes, I think what we saw though is early on with the mask decision, there was not 80% of people wearing masks. I'm not sure it's 80% now, and that's about the number we need to get at. We talk a lot about other resources, and they're really helpful. We need to ramp up testing. We need to ramp up contact tracing. We need to ramp up all these things. But at the same time, we need the community to embrace what we know is needed right now.
Okay, Dr. Teresa Cullen from Pima County Health Department, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Amid a pandemic, a recession, and ongoing unrest, this year's election season is ramping up. With Arizona's primary less than a month away, an already hectic 2020 presents a lot for voters to consider. To unpack the headlines that may influence their decisions, our analysis comes from the Tucson Sentinel's Dylan Smith and the Green Valley News Sahuarita Sun's Dan Shear. Let's begin with COVID-19 pandemic. Has it at all shifted the political landscape in our region? Dan, I want to start with you on this one.
Yeah, you know what? It's made for a lot of very boring Zoom debates and forums. Unfortunately, if I have to watch one more of those, there's a different dynamic when everybody's in the same room and you have an audience, and I think that's really been missing. And so we've actually skipped a couple because of that, and just done Q&As in the paper and get more information out there. But it also certainly people are more focused on the economy and on safety, and I think those are the two words when it comes to COVID and political races right now.
I would agree with Dan that both for all of us as journalists and the folks trying to run as candidates, this environment is very different, challenging. People are having to try and figure out how to do it in a completely new way. But it's also made for some interesting moments with some candidates, trying to do some new creative things that maybe will continue even once we are well past this pandemic.
Unemployment is going to drop off here at the end of the month, or is expected to. Are these the issues that the candidates are having to shift their message to now?
Well, I think they've been on this for a while, and so the extra money for unemployment should go away on July 31st. There are several movements in Congress to address this, but yes, the candidates have pivoted toward this. If you even just go to their websites, you can see that addressing this issue is the very first thing that they're doing. And again, a lot of them are hitting it from either the economic standpoint, long term, which is a very big concern, or the current concern, which is safety and making sure people are tested and that we reopen the schools responsibly.
I think you're very on point to raise that point of reopening schools. That is all of a sudden becoming a pretty hot issue as we are, basically a month away from what would be the traditional back to school day. And there are a lot of parents who are very concerned about sending their kids back to school in person. Certainly a lot of teachers and other school employees who are very concerned about that. And that doesn't just play into the issue of schools and how we fund them and how we open them back up to teach kids, but also if families are keeping their children at home out of school, how does that play into whether someone is able to go to work? And that's an additional pressure to extend some sort of unemployment relief.
Let's say kids don't go back to school and the federal dollars dry up. What becomes of this community?
That's a great political election year question. And I think everybody, unfortunately, is trying to answer it from that standpoint of what do people want to hear? That we're going to give them more money, that we're going to make sure their kids are safe, that the economy long term is going to be, we're watching out for that. So that's a great question. I don't think that the federal government's involvement in assisting businesses and individuals is over yet, nor should it be, only because there is such a big question mark by this resurgence we've seen, particularly in Arizona.
Let's shift gears here just a bit. Dylan, I want to start with you. This is a story the Tucson Sentinel really brought to light here recently. The death of Carlos Lopez in Tucson police custody. I mean, this is gained some national traction. People in Tucson, they're watching this. There have been demonstrations. Where does this take us as we move into the next few weeks here?
Certainly, there's a whole lot more information just about this specific incident that has yet to be released. Since we broke the story a couple of weeks ago, TPD in the city have released basically just 3 documents out of the hundreds, and it may even turn out to be thousands once they provide everything that we've asked them to put out. At the very least, help people understand why they made the decisions they made in withholding this information from both the city council and the public for pretty much 2 months. they should put all of that out and let people understand what they did and when they did it and maybe why.
Dan, in some worlds, people are looking at law enforcement very differently now. Break this down for us. Metropolitan versus rural communities. Are people looking at these issues differently as we head into an election season?
You know, if you look at rural versus urban, sometimes, and again, those are drawn along political lines, but we shouldn't because for the first time in 50 years, we're having an honest discussion in this country about racial issues. And I think it's very positive, and it's unfortunate that these events had to occur to get us to this point. I don't think anybody wants to truly defund the police department, but I do think they want to look at what types of incidents police are called to, whether they are the best equipped to handle them, and whether dollars should go to other places that could better assist people, not just go in and arrest them and cart them off and have them in this cycle. And then the police are back 3 weeks later.
Dylan, is it fair to say the candidates are shifting their message and changing their tune when it comes to some of the talking points?
The change in emphasis has been dramatic, especially locally, since the death of Carlos Ingram Lopez. But even before that, people were shifting how they approach this at the local level. And that's become a much different conversation than it has been in the past. You've got folks who have been maybe a bit more centrist and reticent to take strong stands on these kind of issues, changing up what they're talking about and putting out some pretty specific ideas about it rather than just talking in platitudes, as we've seen so often before. To the point about defund the police, I think there are a few people who very strongly believe that we should just get rid of police departments. There
Yeah,
are a
it's
whole lot
ridiculous.
more. There are a whole lot more who have seized on what is a provocative slogan to push the idea of some pretty fundamental reforms in policing and law enforcement and public services.
Well, it's a ridiculous idea to defund the police. We know that, but it's a good conversation to have to ask whether they are meeting a community's needs. As far as the incident that happened in Tucson, which was very unfortunate, I think we're still trying to figure out what are the issues there. You know, with the police, what they did, and clearly they did not follow protocols there. And with the young man who obviously had a lot of personal problems before the police even showed up. And then you have a mayor who is politicizing this from the very beginning. Shame on her, because this was an opportunity, and she, I think, tried to step out and get the spotlight, and I think it blew up in her face, quite honestly, and I'm glad for it. But overall, this is an opportunity for Tucson, but I don't know quite yet exactly what the issues are that should come out of this. But as Dylan mentioned, when we get more paperwork on this and the video, maybe we'll know.
All right, let's move on to the primary that's right around the corner here in August. What's the headline that week?
The question is, will people show up, and will that translate into a big turnout in November? And I can tell you that if you're a voter and you are not showing up now with all that is going on in this country, you are completely and utterly hopeless. And so this is the time, and voting matters. And I don't care if you do it from your couch or you go to the polls, but this is the time to do it. Study those issues, know who's out there, know where they stand, and vote. If we can't get them out this time, I don't know what would.
If the events of the past 4 years haven't taught people that elections do have consequences, and it's not just about voting for the one person or the other in the office, but all of the other decisions that result from that, I think Dan's very much correct, and people need to finally realize that.
Okay, we'll have to have you guys back with some insight as we move into the next 4 months here. My thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
After years of negotiations, a new trade agreement has taken effect between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The USMCA replaces the 26-year-old NAFTA. Each year, Arizona exports billions of dollars worth of goods to Mexico and Canada. We learn more about how the new deal impacts that relationship from Zabe Sheikh, Consul General of Canada in Los Angeles. Tell me a bit about the relationship between the United States and Canada. What sorts of goods are exchanged?
Relationship is so integral and has been so integral historically that it's probably really beneficial to sort of even lens down into what's happening in Arizona, where Canada is the number one foreign direct investor in Arizona. There's 500 Canadian owned companies employing about 23,000 Arizonans. And in Tucson alone, you've got something like 5,000 Arizonans who go to work every day for Canadian companies. And that can range anywhere from Lululemon and Aldo to BMO, Mattel, Bombardier, of course, and even Mattamy Homes.
The dairy industry has been considered one of the big winners in this agreement. Can you tell us a bit about why that is?
It delivers a big win actually for the dairy market because it grants exporters additional access to the Canadian market. And so, in terms of how the supply chain works on a daily and hourly basis, this is of great positivity, but also great to energize the economic standpoint and future of the dairy market. This idea of greater access to Canadian market was something that was key on the negotiating table between the two countries, and so it's a win-win as we look at it.
Many of us are using USMCA and the term NAFTA interchangeably, as we know it's a revamped agreement. What would you say are some of the key differences?
Well, I think that one of the biggest differences, Lorraine, is that this is a 21st century agreement in the fact that there are major updates when it relates to technology. The idea that the tech industry and the idea of a tech sector really wasn't in play when NAFTA was first around. On a big picture level, this actually affects almost 230,000 jobs in the state, which are supported by trade to Canada and Mexico for Arizona. And then, 95% of Arizona's vegetable exports are shipped to Canada. And so that deal brings a real certainty. And then finally, on a conceptual note, I'd say that this agreement is really important because it ups that idea of labor standards, environmental standards, and access and equity on a gender level and on a diversity and inclusive level.
It's no secret that Canadians love the Arizona sun, a rich tourism industry here. Anything in this agreement that will enhance that relationship?
Ultimately, it really serves that tourism relationship because there's over Canada and Mexico are responsible for about 4.6 million of Arizona's 5.8 million international visitors. And as you called it, there's also, that idea of the Canadian snowbird in Arizona. And that means that there's just also property, real estate development, and the economy is really integrated between Canadians and Arizonans. And certainty, ease of market access, and the ability to move goods and services back and forth with greater efficiency, I think, is a win-win for even the tourism sector. Because this, and once we get over the pandemic, of course, and go back to normal, there's about 212 nonstop direct weekly flights between Canada and Arizona. So we'll see that coming back up, and that'll play a major part in, I think, reset and recovery during this economic period as well.
As the USMCA rolls out in Arizona, much of the focus will be on how it impacts trade at its ports of entry. Mexico remains the state's largest importer of goods, and trade supports thousands of jobs on both sides of the border. As we heard from International Trade Advisor Luis Ramirez, while the pandemic is disrupting that trade, investors remain optimistic about the region.
In the current, manufacturing sector in Sonora, I mentioned in Nogales, 44,500 employees, but at one point in time in late March, certainly April and May, 30,000 of those employees were stuck at home. They were sent home, the stay-at-home orders. Gradually, that has been coming back as manufacturing facilities are implementing those protocols. We're seeing tremendous excitement with the reopening up of the current manufacturing sector. And then we talk to those companies manufacturing there, or those who offer services, and they're going, listen, we used to deal with one or two leads for investment in this region. We're now dealing with 5 or 10 leads per month to invest in this region. We're seeing the interest in Sonora, we're seeing the interest in Arizona, and everything that we can bring together as a region for those companies who want to invest for the long term.
USMCA talks about things like labor, the environment. Is Mexico prepared to step up in that respect?
They've been taking the right steps. And in fact, if you recall back in February, March timeframe, there was a lot of discussion about had Mexico implemented the necessary labor reforms that were part of the condition for US and Canada to sign on to the agreement. And literally, I think it was May 1st, if I remember correctly, the president signs into law a number of labor reforms. In addition, there are additional provisions that are being adopted or considered by the Mexican Senate as we speak. So I think they will be there. For the most part, they already are from an implementation perspective. And in reality, if they had not been ready, then none of the three countries would have been able to say that July 1st is the implementation date.
I want to ask you about the auto industry because that's changed quite a bit, including that Mexico will need to pay, and you tell me if I'm correct on this, at least 40% of those auto parts need to be produced by someone who's making at least $16 an hour in Mexico. Is that correct?
That is correct. And while the intention might have been initially by the US to encourage companies to do the auto parts and all the way through assembly in the US, we're hearing now, for instance, of Japanese automakers that were in the process of investing billions of dollars in Mexico. So it is also raising what they're going to be paying in Mexico. I think from a long-term perspective, it's much easier for a company that is going to be in the automotive sector to look at both countries, not just look at Mexico because of quote unquote lower cost of labor. I think companies are now being forced to look at the total cost of operations and then determine what is the most competitive location. And that's location, logistics, business environment, certainty of investment. All those factors are going to making a multi-billion-dollar decision like the Japanese did.
How important is this relationship between Mexico and Arizona? I recognize you've consulted on both sides of the border.
We've invested substantially in our infrastructure. We've built the relationships, not just with the state of Sonora, but with the entire Arizona-Mexico corridor all the way to central Mexico. And we continue that process. But I would not limit us to that conversation with Mexico. I know you had the Consul General of Canada, and the story between Arizona and Canada has been phenomenal. Of those 500 Canadian companies doing business in Arizona, you're now starting to see Canadian companies investing in Arizona to then start looking at the Mexican market. It truly is, they're leveraging what USMCA has to offer through Arizona.
Okay, Luis Ramirez, an international advisor along the U.S.-Mexico border. Thanks for your insight.
Thank you, Lorraine.
That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. To get in touch, visit us on social media or send an email to Arizona360@azpm.org and let us know what you think. We'll see you next week.